Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of my Devlog from Wisp, where I talk about the progress of Wisp, and I also pick one ludological topic to talk about each week. If you're not interested in the game progress, you can just click here, so below my face, and then you will be able to skip ahead to the ludological topic, which in this case is narrative in games. But first off, we will talk about the progress of my game. Um, Last week I finished. The week before I already worked on this, but last week I finished the level progression manager, which is basically a level manager, where I can just sort which levels will come after which. What I did before there, I basically had at in each level I just pointed to the next level, which had a couple of problems. Like first off, if you skipped a couple of levels, it would then you would need to rearrange them in, and also the problem was that it didn't have a good oversight. So I worked on that to have to give me an easier way to do the level progression later. And also a good thing is that these names here right now, these are the old names, and I can actually give them now meaningful names, so I know what is inside the level, which will help me later on also in managing what comes after which, and I can make a better decision later on about that. Yes. So the next thing I did is I added functionality to get the time scale, or to change the time scale in a character. I already used the script to pause the game. Now I'm also using it to change the speed of time. What is timescale? That's a Unity term. That's basically a way in Unity to say how fast the game should go. If you have a timescale of 1, that's 100%. If you have 0.9, that's 90%. So that means that the lower the number, the slower time will move. For my game, I will give the easier characters a little bit a lower time scale, which will make them a little bit easier to control because you don't have to react as fast. It's not as great of a benefit as you think, because the reaction is also a little bit slower. Not the reaction, yeah, maybe the reaction is a little bit slower. I cannot really explain it greatly, but yeah, I think it's the reaction that's a little bit slower. Not the reaction. No, I'm working with forces, so the reaction is the same, but the time it takes to get speed is also slower. So it's not a huge change for in difficulty, but I think it's a good change overall for the easier difficulties. Yeah. So the next thing I did is I was looking a little bit for music when I was driving around with the bus and stuff, and I found this site which is Machinima Sound, and it has some royalty-free, free-to-use sounds. Some others you have to pay for, but I really enjoyed the sounds, and I'm really thinking of taking music from him and maybe even contacting him later on to ask him to do music, especially for my game. I really enjoyed these sounds, and I will probably put them in. I'm not sure if I will keep some of the old music in. I will have to see how well it matches with this music. Yeah, I didn't put it yet in, but I will soon. So, but I found the music and I sorted everything out, and yeah. So that's basically it for the progress report. Now we will talk about the ludological topic, which is narrative in games. First, we will take a quick brief look at the history, or not that brief, but brief enough. Then we will look what's currently going on. Like with currently, I mean like in the year history, or what is it called? Like right now and like a little bit back. And then I will talk about what I think the future can hold. Like obviously, all the stuff in the history will still be feasible in the future, because like no one game concept will completely remove another, like at least like most of the time. But yeah, so in the and I will start a little bit later with the history now, because like with games like Pong, I will just leave out because there is literally no narrative at all. So as you can see here, the first games that had like a little bit of narrative basically were games like Mario, I would say, or like games in the same vein where actually a character was moving on the screen and you can actually see something happening with the character. Um, in Mario, for example, you will save or you try to save the princess, which is basically the entire story. Like that's not a great story or anything, but basically that's what you do. You beat the levels to get to the princess, and the princess was kidnapped, and you try to save her. That's basically the story. It's a very simple story, but it's still a story. The same is with like all these action fighting games or games like Doom and stuff like where you basically just beat up the bad guys basically, or if you are a bad guy, you beat up the good guys, and that's basically the story. Like there's not a real story going on, but like that's like it gives you a sense of empowerment and maybe even of you're doing something right. But there's like little to no story in most of these games in the end. Yeah. So then a little bit later, what we actually started doing is we took a look at movies and we took basically movie scenes, small movie scenes, and put them into the game. Like they are called cutscenes, I think you all know, which basically means that there's a part in a game where you cannot do anything. And there will basically just a video be playing. Usually it's obviously in the same style as the game itself. In the past, there was actually some stuff that where the cutscenes look way better than the game. But it's still done a little bit today. But I also see a lot of cutscenes now that are just I think rendered real time even. Like they don't even bother changing it up that much because like it also breaks a little bit the immersion. But what we did with these cutscenes, we basically built a linear story, and in between the story we put gameplay. And then basically what would happen is that once you finished like a certain amount of gameplay, you will get rewarded with another piece of the story. And so you can even change then like stuff that we did in the past, like in Mario where we changed just the level theme. You could even then change the level theme and give a reason for that. And so like you had a linear story that was told, that explained what was going on in the world, and it gave you a little bit of background. And it was also nice to just have to sit back and enjoy the story. I think that's a very legitimate way of doing things, and the modern ones are doing it really greatly. They integrate mechanics and stuff way more, but we will talk a little bit later about that more. Another thing that happens in the history, I think, then later on were open world games, or maybe even just open story games, let's put it like that, where you could basically tell your own story. That might happen in a very simple game as well, where basically something awesome can happen, like in Pong, for example. I will now talk a little bit about Pong. Maybe you had a really close game with a friend, and you were really lucky in the end because of whatever the controller broke or something like that. And then you have a story that is told from inside the game. That's stuff that with real stories you can do in open world games. What they basically did is sometimes they have or most of the time I would say they have a main storyline, and then they have a bunch of side small little stories, very small stories that you do. And what they will do is they will give you all these small stories, and in the end you are supposed to put them together to create your own story and see or basically put it together. That's a nice concept, and I think it works pretty well. The problem with that is that usually the small side stories will feel pretty empty because there are no real stories there. Like I think it's a great opportunity here for if you would do the side stories a little bit more interesting and even a little bit longer. Like the problem with these side quests is that usually it's just a one-off thing, and like there's not much going on, and there's also no real decision. You just do them all or do a lot of them, and like they're completionists, and like it doesn't really feel like there's much going on. It still is a great thing, I think, to do, and like open world games are really great for for that, like that you can tell your own story. Um, there were other games where you could do this, like some strategy games and other stuff, where you can also tell a story. Even, especially if the games are very long, you can then tell what happened in the game, and that is the story you tell. Like games like Civilization did that pretty well, I think. So now we get to narrative in games in the present. Narrative in games in the present, I would say there are a couple of things, but one really interesting thing that happened is the basically story-only games. Story-only games, what I mean by that is basically games like Telltale games, with The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, where you have still a very linear story, but um, you have some branches that go off, like most, at least if they are well done. You have branches that go off, and you have some amount of stuff you can change and other amount you can't change, and that makes the game really interesting in terms of the story. You still, like I said, you still have a linear story most of the time, but you can basically change it. Like it's not really linear. It's like if it's well done, it is a little bit dynamic. Like I played recently King's Quest, and King's Quest had some dynamic elements in it, like basically exchanging characters. Like let's say, like I don't want to spoil anything, so but let's imagine you play a game and you walk around, and then you basically then can decide who is the bad guy, or who am I going to bring with me in the team, and then that might change the story further. Like maybe if you bring someone as certain, you can actually go another way. Stuff like that, I think, is very interesting, and it will not change the overall story a lot, but a little bit, and it might even change a cutscene here or there, and but like the Telltale games, they are just almost only story. The King's Quest, as I said, I didn't want to spoil, so I didn't give the example. I didn't give the real example, but the King's Quest has more gameplay in it. It's basically an adventure game. It's a really great game. I can really just tell you guys to check it out. It's a great one. But there's more in the present going on. Like that's only one branch of story games basically. We have a lot of other branches that are coming from the indie scene right now. We have stuff like Papers, Please, which basically puts you in a role and lets you do that the stuff the role's doing, and then also in the basically where the mechanics of the game itself tell the story. Like in Papers, Please, you are basically at the border and deciding who gets into the country or not, and then you are in an oppressive regime, and you need to basically obey them in order to feed your family, and also you need to, and also you, if you don't perform well, you will make less money, and if you perform well, what it means is you will basically say to a lot of people they cannot come in, and that's the tension in the game. At least that's how I understood it. I didn't play it as much. I'm not a huge Papers, Please fan, to be honest, but I think it's a very interesting idea. So having a game where the mechanics tell the story is very interesting, and I think that's not a lot explored. You could even put it into the future section, because I think a lot of games will look more at what Papers, Please did, or games like Gone Home. But maybe I'm too fast. I will talk about this later. Yeah, I think games will look more at this. Now let's go to games like Gone Home, which basically it's very similar to Papers, Please in that the mechanics of the game are reinforcing the story, but it's not really like that, because in Gone Home you are more exploring stuff and still getting fed the story, but you basically just walk around interacting with stuff, and just the environment tells the story, which is called environment storytelling. And that's also a very interesting approach, that stuff that is just laying around and you can consume story at your own pace. But it's still a linear story. You will just the order you get the stuff changes a little bit. So that's another way of doing it. what I was thinking about before, which is where the mechanics really also tell a story, are survival games. Like I played The Forest recently, and I think it's a great example. Like you in The Forest, your plane crashes and you get set on a, I don't know, I always imagine it's an island, but you basically are in a forest, hence the name. Um, and you walk around, and like in typical survival, you will have to build stuff, and then there are zombies that will hunt you. But the interesting thing, like these two other survival games, I think do this as well, but I didn't play them as much. Um, the interesting thing is that although there is no cutscene or anything like that, you really feel like you are there. Like there's no music, you just walk around. Then at all of a sudden there will be a zombie. You will actually be scared. You will need to find food, and like everything in the game will make you feel the dread of surviving. And I think that's what makes this game so great. Like I think the survival game genre in of itself is just a start for other games like that, but we still haven't figured out how to get other games to make the mechanics make you feel like you're there. It's a really interesting thing to do, and if you can get it right, I think it will have a huge payoff. As you can see with the survival genre, if you think about it, it's it's what they all have in common is that basically the game tells the story with you instead the game tells the story to you. So I think that's a really great thing of survival games. Um, yeah. So I will talk a little bit now about the future and what I think we could do or should do, even, I would say. Like, first of all, I think what we should look a little bit more at board games because they do interesting stuff. Like, they have a lot of problems in board games with telling stories, and they became really innovative to try to put stories into their games. Most of the board games are very mechanically focused, and like telling a story with the mechanics is also a lot harder because stuff is a lot abstracted. So like the stuff we talked about before, where the mechanics has a story, is I think video game specific. But what I'm going to talk now about is what board games do, and what that we could even apply to us. Like what board games do a lot to tell a story a little bit is often they do stuff like event cards. And what it means is basically you play a game and then you draw a card, and on the card something it tells you what happens in the game, and then it will have impact on the game. So let's imagine you're I will give video game examples, but just to just to make it clear, like let's say you play a game of Civilization, and the a natural disaster is happening. That's basically an event card in a board game. Like there's something that happens that will impact the game. Like I actually don't like that example because it's like not a good, like people have bad feelings about it. But you could even do it to boost you up. Like there could be stuff that happens randomly that will just boost stuff for you, and maybe even do something bad. Like as long as you have the feeling we can do something about it and stuff, it might still be fine. So. But that's really interesting, and what you can do is you can even go further than that. Like in our games, we can first of all we can have interaction between the events, which means like you can basically chain certain events together, and you can even like if you would do a story game, like let's say you want to like what I was thinking about is a game set in World War II, and you are basically a normal family living your life, and the game is about how a family would do live their life basically in World War II, a German family. And so what the game would do is it would first of all it would have different meters, which will basically tell you what, like you will need to do some stuff in order to not get departed yourself and killed yourself, because if you help the opposition, like you would just get killed. So there would basically be like, that's a really rough idea. Just so to think about, you would basically have stuff like similar to Papers, Please, where the mechanics basically will tell you you need to do certain stuff, even if you don't like to do it, you need to do it. in order to survive. Like in Papers, Please it's in order to get food, but in this case it might be just so that you don't wake the suspicion of the Nazi party. So that would be one mechanic. As I said, it's very rough, and the decisions you make on these events that will happen will influence these different values, and also can get other events after them. So let's say there would you would be at home, and then the game, by the way, I'm imagining is based around these events. So you would be at home, and then an event would come, which is basically a cutscene where a girl, a Jew girl, will come running to your door, knocking on it, and begging you to get in. And you can then decide if you want to let her in or not. And you don't even need to do that in a dialogue option. You can just make you open the door. Like, you can just open the door and the girl will walk in. And if you do that, though, the game would basically know that, and then probably the police will come afterwards, will search for her. If they don't find her, they will maybe still think you're suspicious because, like, maybe somebody saw someone get in, and basically your meters will change and all that stuff will happen. But you did something good, and like the idea about this game is that's the tension, is that you really want to help the people, but it's really hard for you to do so. And like even the game itself could even give you different stuff to accomplish, like maybe just survive the World War is one, and then later maybe do something like Sophie Scholl or something like that. Like the game could give you different objectives to finish. And what I'm imagining is that the game itself would be composed of a lot of these events, and some of these events might have implications later on. Like, let's say you get an event where Adolf Hitler would come, like if you are working in a hair cutting studio, where Adolf Hitler would come to your place and you will cut his hair, and then maybe later on you can then meet him, and maybe because you meet him you could do an assassination attempt or stuff like that. Like stuff, there might be stuff that is either more likely or just possible because you did what you did. Exactly. So my idea is to have a game composed of all these events, and these events put together will then create the story. And I think that's similar to what the open world game does, but it's like focused on the story itself, and you will have to see that each of these events is at least plausible to happen in what kind of stuff you have, and then just basically telling the story like this. I think that's an interesting idea, that if you have good mechanics mechanics that represent also the theme, or to help you tell a story, it would be a really interesting thing to do. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's an interesting thing to do, and it's not terribly hard. The next thing that I'm going to talk about, and what I wanted to say here is with this picture is that the player, because like if you have all these different events, sometimes it feels like the player needs to bridge the gap basically. But I think people will actually do that. I think that's not that hard for them if you present them with an overall story and an overall theme. The mechanics are supporting it. They will actually say, okay, the girl that came was a part of my story, and then later maybe I don't know, like I don't really have good examples. Maybe you see something, like you see some Jews get shot, or and you didn't do anything, or then later you maybe you find out that somebody in your neighborhood is actually helping the bad guys, in this case the good guys, whatever, the resistance of the Nazi regime, and then do you report them or not? And then maybe if you don't report them, it will have that you will get interrogated and all that stuff. And like an interrogation itself can be part of a lot of stories. Like maybe just an interrogation will get more likely if you decide a certain way, and stuff like that. Basically you can basically tell a story with that without having to reference each other. It would be good if like maybe the interrogation should then be about what you did, and like that's maybe a special card that will always reference back to what happened, or like a card, it's not a card, but a special event that will always reference back to what happened, and then maybe you need to record this special event a couple of times, like maybe a lot of times, but overall it will give the feel a very dynamic feeling without being like it's really dynamic, but without having to do like all this crazy work that you will need to do if we are talking about the last thing I want to talk about, which is basically real dynamic stories and how I think they can be approached. I actually think I thought about this a long time. I actually think you can even do real dynamic stories, and what I mean by that is, or what I'm imagining, is that you have basically characters. Like I got this idea when I listened to a podcast about live roleplay labs, basically. So the guy told in the podcast told the listeners that, or me in this case, that a good lab master, role-playing master, will always not write a story, but give characters to the people and give them their goal. And I think that's how we would need to approach stuff like that. Oh, and by the way, what I forgot to mention is, like, which goes a little bit into the direction, is obviously Shadow of Mordor. I should have talked about this before anyway. So, but Shadow of Mordor obviously has some really interesting mechanics as well, which goes a little bit into dynamic story, but it's not really dynamic story. It's more like the event thing I talked about before, where you have certain events that happening and people put these events together to do stuff. But what it does really well is it also has the mechanics of the game then create the story, because if the guy flees, which is basically a game mechanic, it will be get fed back into the story, and like all the also killing certain stuff will have influences on the game, which is also like a mechanic that is feeding back into the narrative, which is a great way. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about here. Like, imagine a game where basically you would generate, let's say 5, because we have 5 here now, 5 characters, and all give them a goal in their life. And like, depending on what their peers are, they might have good ways to reach their goal, or not so good ways to reach their goal. And each goal you have has different ways you can achieve them. And depending on how the character, okay, let's give a concrete example. Let's make it easy, so it's easy to understand. Which is not the best story right now, but you can imagine then later with a better story. Let's say you create a character who strives to dominate the world, okay? Or let's say dominate a city. Like, he wants to really get the entire city behind him and then brainwash them, basically. So that's the story. That's the main story, basically, later on for this character. And so you get into the city, and there's a character going around. Basically, like, there's a couple of things he could do. Like, either like he hired, like, let's say we are in a fantasy world, he hired a magician and he just casts all of them into his will, which is a pretty boring thing. But what if there is basically an election going on and he tries to gather support for him and get to be the mayor of the city? That would be an approach. Another approach is that maybe he just basically will buy his way into it, like he will just give people money and get them up. Like, if he has a lot of money, maybe he will kill a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do, and all you need to do for that is basically you need to generate systems that show like how people will stand to each other, and also generate systems that affect that. So basically, what usually happens in a story is that there are different protagonists that interact in different ways with each other, and that's what we basically need to program. I'm not saying this is easy. I think it's doable, but it's a lot of work, obviously. But if you look at it from this perspective, I think it becomes clear that we would be able to generate something like that. Like we then would be able to generate basically different stories, and depending on which kind of interactions you give the characters, and also what kind of like how basically their stats are, the story would be randomized, and then also what the influence are. You can even go so far that like maybe you can even change the stories of certain characters. Maybe you and another character want the same, but then you betray him and he hates you, and that changes his goal from basically, let's say, both of your goal was to help a certain group of people, and but you betrayed him because you also had a goal to save your girlfriend, and to save your girlfriend you needed to betray him, and so you betrayed him, and then because you betrayed him, his main goal now becomes to get revenge on you, which would be once again like a pretty easy thing to do. But as I said, if you give them enough different actions that people can take, with enough ways they can take, like a revenge could be taken by either confronting you directly, maybe helping enemies out, and then like what is important if you do that is it cannot be hidden. Like at some point he has to get out and you have to fight against him, and he tells you the story that he did it. Like that's also pretty weak. Maybe he would come there, or you would see him talking to them all the time, to your enemies basically, and supporting them, or maybe you will see a banner of his. Stuff like that, which is not that hard to implement, like especially like stuff like giving them a banner, like the enemies, like if like the guy has a banner itself, then maybe you can get support, and or maybe if you walked around with him, you know how the people who follow him look like. Maybe you will just put people from him against you. Like there are a lot of possibilities. Maybe he will betray you later. Like he will just keep on working with you, but later at some point he will betray you, and stuff like that could be done, and generate basically stories from the scratch. Like it's obviously not completely from the scratch. We are still talking about generation here, but like one of these, if you build an engine like that, one engine like that could generate a lot of stories, I think. And I think it would be very interesting to see what can come out of this. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I gave you a little bit stuff to think about. The format here is new. If you like the format, please tell me. You can follow me on Twitter, which is Keyboard Samurai with an Y at the end, at Keyboard Samurai. You can like my Facebook page from Will Glow the Wisp. Just search for Will Glow the Wisp on Facebook. You can download my game at www.parttimeindie.com or at IndieDB and search for Will Glow the Wisp. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a nice week and bye.